Hello everybody, I'm Dan Murrell here with my thoughts on the first two episodes of Daredevil, Born Again, the official re-entry of Charlie Cox's Daredevil back into the MCU after some cameo appearances for him and for Vincent D'Onofrio. I'm going to break this review into two different parts. So the first part, I'm not going to give any spoilers. Then I'm going to do a spoiler review of the first two episodes. They're both available to watch right now on Disney+, so whether you've seen them or whether you haven't, you can still keep on watching the video. So let's jump into Daredevil Born Again, which, as I mentioned, did debut last night on Disney+. New episodes are going to be coming out weekly. And I'd say this show is kind of a continuation of the Netflix show. There's not much plot-wise that's brought over, but it's not a reboot either. It's a fresh start, and that was made abundantly clear from the very beginning of the first episode with a lot of things, one thing in particular that I think are really going to polarize fans of the first Daredevil show over on Netflix, but obviously it kind of planted its flag in the ground and said, okay, this is the point from where we're doing something completely different. And this really doesn't feel like the original show. It's kind of an MCU dark. I don't really think that you could go back in time, believe it or not, 10 years to when Daredevil first premiered on Netflix. The show ended in 2018 and tried to replicate the feel of that show. That's just not what Disney Plus is. That's not what the MCU is. So I wasn't walking in thinking, oh, well, this is just going to pick right up where the Netflix show left off. It is definitely sort of in its own category. Some of the stylistic choices I didn't mind, but I wasn't a fan of how some of the CGI was employed, especially for some of the fight scenes that we saw in that first episode. The fighting I think they had to include because that's one of the places where the first Daredevil show really made its mark when people were talking about the hallway fight and all these other things. So I think you do still have to have those fight sequences, but they held back on a lot of it really until we got deep into episode 2. However, there was some stuff in episode 2 that felt a lot more on par with what we've seen before. And I wonder if there was a conscious choice on Marvel's part to pull back until you got a little bit further in the series to allow Daredevil Born Again to sort of establish itself. The main focus of the show is on Matt Murdock and Wilson Fisk as Fisk runs for mayor of New York City, and Murdock begins to rethink a decision to quit being Daredevil. And the whole Fisk is mayor thing is, of course, straight out of the comics, but I also don't think it's unbelievable to watch a story where a controversial figure is able to ride a wave of populism to try to win an election. That actually seems quite believable to me. What I don't think the show does very well is to explain how Wilson Fisk specifically as a character got from where he has been in the shows and in the MCU to where he is at the beginning of this season. There was a lot of kind of hand-wavy, well, you know, that happened off screen. I think that they could have connected the dots a lot better for him on a character level. And I think a lot of this applies to some of the new characters that were introduced too. They were kind of like, oh yeah, that person, they've been over there the whole time. Honestly, I think that this is a function of the fact that this show was heavily retooled, and it's not just rumored, it's been reported verifiably by Disney and Marvel that the show was heavily retooled after about 6 episodes were shot during the writer's strike. I think they looked at it and said, this isn't quite working. And so they brought in a new showrunner. They went back and shot a lot of new stuff. Apparently the whole first episode was redone. So that episode 1 you saw yesterday was all new stuff that was done after production had begun. And so I think going forward, what we're going to see is a hybrid of the new stuff combined with some of the old stuff. Apparently the approach originally that was made was more of a procedural, maybe something closer to what we got with She-Hulk. The biggest compliment I guess I can give it is that the seams aren't really that visible for me so far, and that hasn't always been the case. Now, as I mentioned, I think that first episode was completely reshot stuff. So as we go further into the series, maybe that will change as we get some of the original material, which was supposedly kind of more of a lighthearted tone, or at least not as dark as they're going, combined with the new stuff that is more in line with what we saw on Netflix. But this doesn't feel like an all new, brand new Daredevil. It just kind of feels like a new phase of the show that we've already seen. Charlie Cox is still great in the lead role, and while terrible things do still happen to him, he's not quite as tortured as he was on Netflix, at least not so far. The core of the character, though, remains the same. Vincent D'Onofrio's Wilson Fisk is also much closer to the Netflix version than the more cartoonish Kingpin that we saw in Hawkeye, and I think that the tense battle of wills between Fisk and Murdock is the highlight of the first 2 episodes, and I look forward to seeing more as the season goes on, and the new leaves that both of these characters have turned over inevitably begin to wither away. The new characters on the show, I think, are a mixed bag thus far. I like the character of Cherry Sherry, who's played by Clark Johnson. He's Matt's retired police buddy and legal investigator. The two characters have an easy relationship on the page. I think the actors have a good chemistry. Nikki M. James also has good chemistry as Matt's legal partner, Kirsten McDuffie, though so far she's mainly there to tell Matt to cheer up, which, as we all know, is not something that's possible. And Margarita Laviva makes, I think, a good foil for Charlie Cox as Heather Glenn, Matt's love interest, and also a licensed therapist. It's really kind of hard to see the Matt Murdock that we saw in a relationship with She-Hulk a couple of years ago, but the idea of character consistency is something that I think the MCU gave up on around the time that Thor became a moron. You just can't look to every past show or movie and expect the characters to be the same, at least not in this kind of chaotic period of Marvel TV and filmmaking. So the Daredevil Kingpin stuff is great. I don't really care as much so far about Matt defending another vigilante in court, complete with the line of dialogue, "He wasn't in possession of the magical amulet," which he delivers straight-faced to a judge.
That guy's a vigilante.
He wasn't in possession of his mystical amulet.
This was in episode 2, and the writing credit for episode 2 is given to the original creators and writers of the show. So if that line is indicative more of the tone that we were going to get with the Daredevil show, then I think that retooling it was probably the right idea. Does Daredevil Born Again hit the heights of the Netflix show? No, I don't think it does, but it doesn't feel completely different. And while some elements are jarring, I do think that this is preferable to a complete reboot of the character because we have so many actors that work well already in these roles. If you haven't watched the episodes yet, I think it's probably best to go in not expecting the Daredevil show you've already seen because this is not that. Yet you can still keep yourself invested in Vincent D'Onofrio and Charlie Cox. And given really everything it's working with, I'd say that this show is off to a decent start. If they continue to focus on what works, which I really do think is the Wilson Fisk storyline and the Matt Murdock / Daredevil storyline, then I think that this season has a lot of potential and a lot of room to grow. We're just going to have to see what happens as the episodes go on. So on my personal rating scale, I'm going to give Daredevil Born Again through 2 episodes a rating of it's good with a lot of room for improvement, and we'll see what that score is when the series is done. So those are my non-spoiler thoughts. Before I jump into my spoiler thoughts on episodes 1 and 2, I want to thank the sponsor for this review, Factor. It's getting warmer, which means it's time to start getting ready for spring. And if you want to start optimizing your nutrition this year, I recommend Factor. Factor sends meals right to your door that are fully prepared and ready to heat and eat in just 2 minutes. That's right, no prep, no cooking, just eating from choices that cover 40 options across 8 dietary preferences every single week. You can try Calorie Smart if you're trying to eat fewer calories, Protein Plus if you're looking to hit the gym, or even Factor's Keto Meals, which based on a randomized controlled clinical trial helped people lose up to 8 pounds in 8 weeks depending on diet and exercise. And Factor isn't just a 1 meal a day option, they also offer smoothies, breakfast, grab-and-go snacks, and other add-ons to fill out your day no matter what you like to eat. I was just looking at what I could order coming up next. On the keto menu, there's a great sun-dried tomato chicken, and under Protein Plus, there's a Fiesta salmon that looks really tasty. What I like is that I can pick and choose the options that I want based on the diet that I want to eat weekly. So if I decide to go Calorie Smart for a week, I can, but there's nothing stopping me from loading up on some extra protein the next week. Eat smart with Factor. Get started at factormeals.com/factorpodcast and use code FACTORPODCAST to get 50% off your first box plus free shipping. That's code FACTORPODCAST at factormeals.com/factorpodcast to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first box. All right, so if you're still watching, I hope you've seen the show because I am going to get into spoilers right now, and we will start with the sadly short-lived reunion of the trio of Matt, Foggy, and Karen. Honestly, this felt doomed from the start, and sure enough, Foggy was murdered by Bullseye mere minutes into season 1. It works as shock value, but I hate to see Foggy done away with after so little time on the show. Apparently, Foggy and Karen were brought into the show when they retooled that first episode, so maybe we should count ourselves lucky that we saw both of them at all. This was a great sign that this is not going to be the Daredevil show that we know, but at the same time, I do feel a little bit cheated. I get it. It's the inciting incident. You've got to jump into it quickly, but it was so fast and so short into the series that it just it broke my heart. Bullseye, I think, is a really cool villain in concept, and that opening fight between him and Daredevil really delivered on some of that, but Wilson Bethel plays a great psychopath, and I liked Matt hitting rock bottom on the roof and then throwing him off. I'm not quite sure how Bullseye survived, because yes, I do know that he got a new spine, but I don't really know if a new spine is going to protect you from your face and your skull being smashed on the street, but I'm glad they didn't kill Bullseye off. I was worried that they were going to, because he is such a really good villain and a great Daredevil villain. I mean, classic villain from the comics. Also, I'm curious if I'm the only one, when they went up to the rooftop and Bullseye ran out, I thought for a second that they brought Spider-Man in for a cameo. I think it's because of the way that they did the sound effects and Daredevil landing on the roof behind him. It looked kind of like Spider-Man, and I thought, wow, this is crazy. People have been thinking there's going to be a Spider-Man cameo forever, and here he's going to pop up when people least expect it, but alas, no. It wasn't Spider-Man, it was just Daredevil who exited the building and then came in from outside. It was a chaotic fight. I'm not going to second guess his crime fighting instincts. So then we get the patented MCU time jump, and as has become custom, if Matt Murdock is on screen, then he is tortured. I mean, he seemed kind of happy at the beginning, but that only lasted for a few minutes. Honestly, I'm glad that he still has some moments of levity in the show, just because it changes it up. We've seen the tortured Daredevil Matt Murdock for so long and so many seasons before then. I'm glad that they can sometimes let him lighten up just a little bit. And really, I don't think it's an inconsistency in character. I think it's him trying to suppress all of the rage inside of him. And of course, we see that explode at the end of episode 2. Fisk running for mayor did seem a little rushed. He went from announcing his candidacy to winning in one episode. And I think that what they missed here was a chance to really show us how he seemingly won over so many people. Like, why is everyone suddenly so in favor of getting rid of vigilantes? But I have a feeling that there was a lot of retroactive maneuvering plot-wise when they redid a lot of the elements of the show. Let's be honest, though. I mean, this felt very Trumpy. This was a very clear metaphor. I mean, the show was done before the election in November, but the parallels aren't that hard to draw. I mean, Fisk's hat may as well have said, "Make New York City great again." I don't necessarily think that it's meant to be an attack on Trump, but they're definitely using the real world politics of right now. But I think that they're also doing something interesting with it. It's not just an empty statement. I like Michael Gandolfini, who's playing Fisk's sort of youth assistant. I'm curious to see how they're going to bring him further into the show. The sit down between Fisk and Matt felt a lot to me like the De Niro-Pacino scene in Heat. Two rivals sitting across from each other, knowing that this is more than likely the prelude to an eventual confrontation. I thought it was well written and superbly acted, and it set them up against each other and led to that great final scene as Fisk is looking down at his city and Matt is looking up, and we get the red wash of light on his face. And I thought that that was a good way to end this first episode and set up the stakes, I assume, for what is going to be either this entire season or this entire series. One thing that's probably a dumb thing to criticize, but, you know, listen, I've never lived in New York, but I did think it was kind of funny that the results of a city mayoral election caused everybody to rush out into the streets. You know, there were so many New Yorkers that were just like, "Hey, yo, there's a new resident of Gracie Mansion. Let's take to the streets, everybody." New Yorkers, correct me if I'm wrong. If this is what you did when, you know, Bill de Blasio won, then I'm way off base. But really, the answer is it's a conceit for the season. I just thought it was kind of funny to picture. New Yorkers really don't get that moved about anything. The second episode, which was called Optics, I thought was a little bit more up and down. I suspect it's more of a blend of the old and the new scenes, though, as I said, the seams between those weren't very blatant. I liked the Fisk stuff we got. I liked that he immediately was feeling the limitations of being kind of stuck inside the bureaucracy of being mayor. And then I liked the way that he broke out of it, that kind of savvy move on his part to get out of his car and demand that the road workers fix the hole in the road immediately, cutting the red tape. It was a great populist move. And I really liked the scene where the police commissioner tries to resign and he subtly threatens him by pulling up the sandwich wrapper and showing him that picture of the secret love child. It was a great Kingpin moment, that way of saying, I own you. I know that I own you. You just don't know that I own you yet. And I hope that we see more of that bleed into his time as mayor. I also liked, and this is a place where I think you can use comedy effectively, that after the commissioner left, he's like, "Oh, this sandwich is terrible.
Sandwich was disgusting."
Now, would the Kingpin that we know in any version ever sit down for marriage counseling with his wife? I'm not entirely sure, but the one thing that we have been shown many times before is that Wilson Fisk will do anything if it means he gets to keep the love of Vanessa. And I like the wrinkle that she now runs the Kingpin's criminal empire and may even potentially be at odds with her estranged husband down the road. The Hector Ayala White Tiger storylines seem to kind of come out of nowhere, especially because he's a hero that we've never seen or met before. I don't know the character from the comics, so all I know about him from the show is that he wears a white costume and apparently possesses a magical amulet that gives him powers. But we'll see how that ties into the overall plot. It actually put Matt on an interesting road that took him to the end of the second episode, which really kind of kicked things into another gear. Sadly, the actor who plays White Tiger, Camar de los Reyes, passed away from cancer in December, and if you noticed, the episode was dedicated to his memory. Another character I'm not entirely sure about is BB Urich, the niece of Ben Urich. Independent journalism is definitely important, but she obviously has a lot to learn as a journalist, because in her big exclusive sit-down with the mayor, all she did was tell him stuff that he didn't know and then run out of time before she was able to actually ask any questions.
Just one more question about Mrs. Fisk.
I'm sorry, but I'm out of time.
I get the function of the character right now. She's basically expository. She's used to let us know as an audience what the people of New York are thinking. But I do hope that they give her more actual characterization and flesh her out if they want to keep including her in the story. So episode 2 ends with Matt saving the only witness in the case against Hector from being killed by dirty cops. And I really liked this scene because it taps into the heroism that we've often seen Matt, not Daredevil, perform on his own. And then when he's on his knees and he's begging them not to push him and make him unleash the beast inside of him, it reminded me of when I used to watch the old Incredible Hulk show with Bill Bixby, and the villain of the week was starting to beat Bruce Banner up, and he's like, no, please don't, no. And then of course they push him too far and his eyes would turn green and he turned into Lou Ferrigno. And that basically happened with Matt Murdock, because the devil came out and he beat the snot out of these cops. I think he may have even killed him. And I loved Cox's acting in this scene, the unhinged expressions on his face. It felt a lot like the old Daredevil. I liked his primal scream at the end, although I didn't love Marvel's decision to cut from Matt screaming to Get Free by the Vines. And listen, it's nothing against the Vines. I owned Highly Evolved on CD. I just think that they're moving towards this thing of we're going to end our shows with pop music when it's not always appropriate for the moment, because I think that the effect that had by ending it with the song was, hey, what you just saw, that was really cool, wasn't it? And I don't really know if that's the feeling you want the audience to have after your main character allows the darkness within him to fully engulf him. But overall, like I said, I think it was a decent start, and I'm going to be looking forward to what the show has to offer going forward. What do you think, though? What do you think of the first 2 episodes? Let me know down in the comments below, and stay tuned right here for more movie news, reviews, box office, and more. Until next time, stay safe, and I'll see you then. Bye.